Right. No, and I'm not I'm not I'm not saying that you should be doing that. It's just
Yeah,
in video games, yeah, there does seem to be an aversion from like acting like these things are making political statements or standing behind them as political statements. It's sort of still treated as a consumer product. But I mean, you sort of touched on something else I did mention I wanted to ask, which was sort of, how do you navigate that, when you have other people's opinions, ideas, and critiques throwing, I don't know how often that happens. I assume it's fairly steadily. But how often does that sort of influence what you are maybe not currently working on, but when you are about to work on something? Like, how much does it influence you, or does it not at all?
Well, I guess, the way I pick a topic is generally whatever is kind of, making me the angriest that week. It's like whatever you feel strongest about is probably going to be the best subject for a cartoon.
Yeah.
And some of those things I know in advance, it's like, oh, well, this is going to piss people off. But I don't think that, for the most part, knowing that I'm going to get some blowback from readers, doesn't really change my course, like, as I'm deciding what to do a cartoon about. I think there probably are some issues like Gamergate where there are issues of like intimidation and online harassment where I haven't really done maybe a little bit, but that there is like another level there where I think people need to be conscious of what might happen. But
you did a cartoon about the Ghostbusters stuff, right?
Right, yeah. And that
I put that all under the umbrella of like toxic internet culture rather than the specific things being supposedly debated in each case.
Yeah, I guess that certainly touched on that culture a little bit, and I thought maybe I would get more. I guess I did hear like there were occasional people tweeting at me just saying, it's not because I'm sexist that I don't want Ghostbusters remade, or just sort of chortling that Ghostbusters wasn't making much money, like haha, and like. But I'd say I expected maybe a little more outrage than I got at that cartoon.
It never comes when you expect it, in my experience.
Exactly.
It's always the most, in my experience, the times that it's happened for me, it's always like the most innocuous, like inarguable thing where suddenly Twitter becomes unusable for a week.
Yeah.
Well, so I know you said you wanted to keep it to about a half an hour. I had just one last quick question for you.
That's fine. If you have a couple more, that's fine.
I have like three. I have three left here, and one on just a personal level. I mean, I'm sort of curious, like what's involved with fact-checking cartoons, because that's something I know nothing about, and that Neiman piece mentioned a little bit about.
Yeah, I can be a little obsessive about that. Because I do feel like I need to do a lot of research and a lot of reading up on a subject, especially once I decide I'm doing a cartoon on this. I do like really go out of my way to cover all my bases and make sure that everything I'm claiming in there I can back up with a link to something if I need to. So I probably spend a little too much time doing that for each cartoon, but I find that it makes me a lot more comfortable, making jokes. If I know that I'm sure, like you can make yourself a little paranoid wanting to sort of fact check every little thing, but but it's important because sometimes I'll just think of something like, oh, well, maybe I need to make sure about that, and then I'll find out, oh, that's a little more complex, and I probably shouldn't make a joke about that, or it is very important to kind of second guess yourself, although you can drive yourself crazy too.
Yeah, I mean, are you fact checking like the colors of people's sweaters, or is it
no.
more? No, it's not down to that level.
Well, I do when I'm drawing people. It's like I do kind of often refer to reference photos, and then I'll just sort of use the same color. I mean, sometimes I literally do try to, I sort of take that from real life. And there's always a little bit of artistic license where, I mean, you're so limited in terms of the space you have with a cartoon, political cartoon, that you do kind of have to paraphrase a little bit. And I try to make clear, or paraphrase as little as possible, or use quotation marks sometimes. I mean, you have to take a few little liberties, but I try to be as clear as I can, when I'm doing that. Make the paraphrase very, very close to what they actually said.
Another thing too is, I mean, you mentioned, the broader world of cartoonists and comics, and I mean, I don't know what the communities are like in cartooning and in political cartooning. I've interviewed a couple of comics artists and writers for this, but I mean, is that a broader world that you feel like you are part of, or does that just feel like some other part of the world that you happen to be working in?
So you're saying do I feel like I'm part of a larger comics industry, or? Yeah,
I'm not sure how segmented it is in the comics world or the cartooning world.
Mm-hmm. I guess I do feel like I don't know as much about the broader comics industry as some people assume I would. I am kind of focused on my own little area, of political cartoons, and like stuff that appears in the Nib, and the artists who are doing nonfiction work or humor, so short humorous strips. But I think the broader comics culture, I don't really know as much as people might think.
What sort of assumptions are people making?
What's that?
I said, what sort of assumptions are people making?
Oh, well, I mean...
That Stan Lee or something, or...
Well, yeah, that sometimes, like, people just would think, oh, you do comics, so you know about these, like superhero comics or, fantasy comics, or... It's kind of like being a writer focused on your own little genre of writing, and then, someone like, oh, you write, so you know all about this, this author who's doing some completely different genre than what you're doing. And, I think sometimes people think of comics as this one, this monolithic industry, when in fact it does have lots of little niches and subcultures, and so. And the thing is, there are some people who follow, a lot of different types of comics, but I guess I don't. I've had my head down, like just working on my own stuff so much that I guess I haven't. There's probably stuff that I should be reading, like really good series, but I guess I just haven't really had time.
Yeah. Well, something I don't know too much about, and I guess the Neiman piece did touch on this, but I mean, why is it historically that this field has lacked diversity? I mean, was it that way in the beginning?
You mean political cartoons?
Yeah.
I think, like most fields, like any field, like lawyers or doctors or, any profession, you go back like 50 or 60 years and it was not very diverse. And so you've had this process in basically almost every field of it becoming more diverse. And with political cartooning, I think maybe the changes that have occurred in comics haven't really, or in the broader comics industry, where it's become more diverse, or at least web comics. It hasn't really happened there as much, simply because that genre is shrinking, and and newspapers are, daily newspapers are struggling, and
Yeah.
I think maybe younger people aren't attracted to that format as much. I mean, I think if I were just starting out and trying to make a living in comics, I don't know if that's what I'd be doing. And even I'm not that interested in doing like the single panel traditional style cartoon myself.
Right.
In some ways, I think there are some people who are really good at it. Like I really like Tom Tolles and Clay Bennett. Those guys are great. Sidney Wilkinson, who I just saw in Philadelphia, is really, I admire that people are able to do that, like single panel work that actually says something, and it's not just like a hack joke. Illustrating the latest news story. I think that's really hard to do. So, but I think as a field itself, probably the fact that that's shrinking has not really helped younger people jump in.
I mean, when you do get sort of pushback or people's responses, and obviously, I think the parallel here, but how often does the kind of vitriol or negative response you get, like how much of that do you think comes from just your being a woman? I've certainly gotten some just, overtly sexist emails and, blog posts written about me, but it's been probably, not as bad for me as some people. I mean, obviously following Gamergate and I know other women have had these huge internet blow-ups where they can't check their Twitter feed for a week. And in my case, there probably is some underlying misogyny in some of the comments, but I think the fact that my work, it mostly is shared on political websites, and I think those networks maybe are a little bit outside of like the mainstream internet or outside of I think people are seeing, obviously they get around and they get shared, and I hear from scary idiots sometimes. But most of my readers, I guess I get a lot of very intelligent feedback too. So, I do think that there's been an uptick in the past year or two of just kind of, more overtly vile comments, or use of misogynist terms. There was a period there where things were kind of placid. I think once people realized the Bush administration was incompetent, because there was a period there after 9/11, the first few years of the Bush administration, during Iraq, where I would get a lot of hate mail, and then at a certain point it became conventional wisdom that they were just totally everyone agreed that they were incompetent, and then it no longer became controversial to say these things. And and now, just I think with the rise of Trump, more and more people are emboldened again. There's been a lot of pushback against some of the, because we do have more diversity in comics than in these subcultures now. There's a lot of pushback from Trump people and people who don't like seeing diversity in comics, and or they think that it's somehow an imposition on free speech to have female characters, this sort of thing. There's been an uptick in that kind of activity, and you're going to take their guns.
Right.
That fits with. I interviewed earlier in the summer. I interviewed a Breaking Bad writer who. Are you familiar with that show?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she's now writing on Better Call Saul, and about a year before Gamergate, there was the New York Times piece from Anna Gunn about the hate campaign against her, and I asked I asked this writer from Breaking Bad, where she thinks this is coming from, and what she said fits with the timeline you're saying, although she talked about shows like The Sopranos and certainly Breaking Bad, where people feel like they can take cues from shows that are about exploring, darker lives or darker sides of ourselves, and that it's okay to indulge those sort of tendencies in them. But she made the distinction that people who actually do that and attack or harass the people who are making the things that they're fans of, she said that they're probably not actually fans at all. It's something else. Mm-hmm. Which you don't have to react to, because I can ask you my last question here, which is related to what you said. I'm curious, just from where you sit, does there seem to be any difference to you from people arguing about politics online or people arguing about video games online?
Does there seem to be a difference between them?
Yeah, is there anything different about the tension or sort of the pissing matches that happen in the arguing from one to the other? Do they seem at all different to you?
Well, I guess from what I know about some of the video game issues, and obviously, some of that has gotten very ugly, and I think those cases have been more extreme, in terms of people going out of their way to harass some commenters there. With politics, I mean, there's certainly some similarities in that there's a lot of there's name calling, and some of the same themes come up, about just arguing about diversity and some of these issues that crop up in both areas. But in general, I'd say political arguments maybe aren't. My impression, anyway, is it's not quite as over the top. I think people get very passionate about politics, but maybe not quite as over the top as Gamergate and some of these other controversies.
You mean seeking out people's families or trying to really sell their personal information online, stuff like that? Yeah, where people really are making a concerted effort. I guess political arguments, thankfully, tend to mostly be about the political issues themselves, and they, obviously they can get very heated, and that's fine. But and that's as it should be, right? Just people. Yeah, but I think you're right there. I feel like it builds to that point. It gets very heated, and then it reaches that natural conclusion of oh, well, that person's just an idiot, and both people are saying that, and then that's the end of it. Right.
And I'm fine with that.
That's yeah.
That's what I prefer.
I don't blame you. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I know we went a little over. Hopefully that wasn't a sort of greatest hits kind of conversation you've had before.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make, I'm not that busy today, so it's fine. I just wanted to set some limits in case, some people like to go on and on, but you've been perfectly polite, so it's fine.
Good. No, well, I've sat where you've sat many times, and so I try to be respectful of that, and I appreciate it. So, thanks for making the time. I'll keep you posted. If there's anything I can do to help on whatever you're working on, please let me know.
Well, I guess if you can maybe link to some of the fusion stories. I feel like I haven't given you enough specifics here. I don't know. I've been speaking in these generalities, and if there's any specific links or anything that you want, feel free to follow up. I can point you to some things.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know, because I think the weirdness always when a journalist is interviewing another journalist or someone who's a writer talking to another writer is we both kind of know what the sort of general day-to-day problems are of the field, and I think there's always a self-consciousness about do people really care who are reading about this? I don't know. I always wonder okay, well, who else needs to care about this? These fields being devalued that doesn't already care? Because I've talked to other journalists who are well, readers don't really care, but I've never had a conversation with an editor where my editor is like, "Hey, are you able to support yourself? Are we paying you enough?" It's that those conversations just never seem to come up.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'm not really venting to you. I'm just like I don't know like if there was more about that kind of stuff that you had off the top of your head that you might want to talk about, but I'm happy to also just let you go if you need to get going.
In terms of the pay and everything.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't want to pry into your stuff. Yeah.
Well, I'm always happy to talk about labor issues in comics, and well, I guess so to get back to that for a minute, I think
yeah.
So basically, things are going pretty well right now, and like I think it's partly a function of the economy, and it's just like when the economy is pretty good, more papers run cartoons, and people aren't quite as stingy with freelance projects and things like that.
Yeah.
I think one concern actually about the internet going forward is this trend I've noticed of like political cartoons being embedded in tweets, and a media outlet will publish a cartoon as someone has embedded it in a tweet, and not even necessarily the cartoonists themselves. And they'll build an article around that, and basically get all the value. It's basically like publishing the cartoon, but it's like finding a way of kind of publishing it as a news story, but without paying for the cartoon. Like
right.
And I've noticed more and more of this. I'm sorry, what's that?
I said just because they just found it on the internet, and it doesn't occur to them to give credit or to
or they'll give credit, but it'll be like the article will be like written around. They'll embed a tweet, and or even sometimes they'll embed a tweet from the cartoonists themselves. And I was talking to a lawyer about it at the AAN conference. It's the Association of Alternative News Weeklies conference that was here in Austin earlier, like this summer. And I think there's some gray area there where, because Twitter has an embed function, news organizations feel like it's fair game as long as that embed function is there on Twitter. Like, you can embed a tweet, and then you're not responsible for any copyright violations. Like, the person who initially posted the copyrighted material to a tweet is the person responsible. So they can just sort of wash their hands of it, and if it's there on Twitter, they can embed it. And that, to me, seems like bullshit. Like, you can't, obviously, like, you have a lot of cartoonists, your work is shared on Twitter, and that's great, and even sometimes I'll publish a whole cartoon, in a tweet, but that doesn't mean that I'm kind of releasing it to all digital media organizations to republish that image, without asking permission. And there seems to be, I think a conversation needs to happen about what's fair use here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to ask, like, if there were labor issues in comics you wish were more acknowledged or upfront. And I know on a personal level, like, I'm just so tired of seeing stories that are series of embedded tweets, and somehow that's an article.
Right. Exactly.
But I think, on the one hand, that means I'm not the audience for it. But on the other hand, I see that a lot.
Right. Stories that are just built around embedded tweets. Not just of cartoons, but other.
Yeah, but also what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, do you think is that costing cartoonists money, or is it just it's being used without permission?
Well, I think that it adds up. Like, it is.
Yeah.
What it could be is like, oh, this cartoon is great. We want to use it, and we want to pay you a reprint fee, which wouldn't be that much. But instead, it's just so much easier to grab a tweet and just quickly put it up. I mean, it's partly like a time thing, right? People don't want to take the time to go through the administrative hassle of like paying someone and reaching out and waiting for them to get back. But I think especially for people who, I mean, it doesn't happen like every day, but it adds up, and I think for people especially who just really need those reprint fees, like every last one that they can get, I mean that is money that they should be making that they're not. And
what's the typical range? What's the typical range for that fee? Or is there no typical?
Well,
for a reprint fee, yeah.
I guess I would say the range for alt weeklies, for print media, it's probably, the average reprint fee is like $15 to $25 for like a alt weekly, and for websites and magazines, it can be like maybe $50 to $150.
Yeah, so that would add up.
So that would, like there are people who really do like need, every last little reprint they can get. And, it's easy to say like, oh, well, I've got paying clients and this just sort of is good exposure. But, but it doesn't, but the thing is, like, if that's what the model is from now on with just these websites, just grabbing tweets and not paying reprint fees at all, then, you really can't have a future like that. You can't. That's really
it's a bad precedent.
So
yeah.
I think if there is one labor issue that gets to me these days is just websites finding a way to use cartoons without asking permission. And I've had it happen to me. And as an editor, I always ask, and I always offer to pay, and I would never dream of just taking someone's tweet and posting it.
Yeah, I remember when this sort of thing started, maybe it was 9 years ago or something. Oh, I don't know when it was. That doesn't matter. But I was an editor at The Onion, and Time Out Chicago had taken some tweets among us in the staff, because this was when the swine flu was going around. We had an office-wide pandemic, and Time Out posted an entire story about how we all had the swine flu, and the story was just really, it gets into just weird territory into okay, is this actually news, and why are you writing this? It felt like an odd invasion, but I remember that sort of being the first time when just why is that relevant?
So they wrote a story about, was this a joke? Or
no, they wrote a story. They wrote a story that was under the guise of please wish them well and we hope you get better soon. It was just it was weird. It was just weird. But social media is and can be weird anyway. But it's a really strange thing, especially when, like you said, it's potentially costing people opportunities or just cash. That's bad.
Right. And I'm all for, it's like a fan wants to share a comic, or, that's fine. I just ask for credit. And, for your, it's not like a for-profit publication. Or, nonprofits right. There is actually sort of a market there. So I would ask, generally, I expect an actual nonprofit organization, a major one, to ask permission or pay a small fee. But
right.
It's up to a point, I'm fine. I realize the internet's the internet and people are going to share stuff they like. But there's a point where I think publication does have a responsibility to, to reach out to a creator when it's clear that they're just finding a workaround, to use their work without asking. And, so that's probably my biggest annoyance these days.
No, that's a good one. I appreciate you bringing that up. On a personal level, I always just wonder, do readers need to be more educated about this stuff? Do they need to be sort of indoctrinated into calling that stuff out? Because I don't think I don't know if they care. It's obviously case by case.
Think of it, especially people.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Kind of in a native digital environment, they just don't. It just seems very natural to them, and it doesn't really. They probably don't have the background to even question it. Why would this be problematic? But yeah. Until we find a way for everyone to make money enough to eat, doing this work, you have to find. There has to be some mechanism to pay the artist. So
yeah. And
when you take that away, it's not like a political cartoonist can make money off of merch or, political cartoons, you have to sell the product itself, it's not, like I can sell T-shirts based on political cartoons, or some other, tangential activity. It's not going to add up to enough. Or, like books, none of that really adds up to enough to support yourself. I mean, you have to actually get paid even a small fee. It can be a small fee, but there has to be a few.
Well, I mean, you do the work, you should get paid. It's really as simple as that.